There comes a time in every young platforming mascot's life where they really have to decide what they want to be, take steps in bold new directions, experiment, and discover their legacy. Or, alternatively, knuckle down, perfect the formula they've already introduced, and solidify their identity. For most platforming franchises, that experimentation comes in their second entry, usually making small but significant revisions such as a change in perspective. Or, more rarely, sizable transformations into entirely different formulas. For Spyro, these changes tend to present themselves as a logical progression from one game to the next. Spyro the Dragon released in 1998, introducing the world to the sassy young dragon and capturing the hearts of PlayStation users everywhere. Only 14 months later, Spyro 2: Ripto's Rage would hit store shelves, expanding on the game in loads of different ways and really exploring the series' potential. And finally, Spyro Year of the Dragon released 1 year later, during, you guessed it, 2000, the Chinese Zodiac Year of the Dragon. With, of course, the version we'll be looking at today releasing 18 years later in the form of the Spyro Reignited trilogy. All 3 of the original Spyro games released in the span of just over 3 years. In my video on Spyro 2, I even mentioned that the 14-month gap between the first 2 games was an astronomically short amount of time. Add all 3 of these together and you get maybe half the amount of time that it takes to make just one game by today's standards. 3 games in as many years really is an astronomically short amount of time. Taking that tight schedule into consideration, it's no wonder that all of these games, and many other similar games of the time, tended to evolve more iteratively, making use of assets developed for previous games and improving functionality behind the scenes. It's one reason why Spyro controls so similarly across each of the games, and it's a huge part of why Spyro 2 felt like the logical evolution that it did. So it almost goes without saying that when Year of the Dragon rolled around, they would embrace many of the strides made in Spyro 2 and attempt to evolve the series in more subtle ways going forward, resulting in a game that feels more like an extension of Spyro 2 than it does a sequel. Debatably better in some ways, and debatably less good in others. But that's why there is a debate. There are plenty of fans of the first game out there, but chances are, if you ask any random fan of Spyro the Dragon which one is their favorite, they're more than likely to say either Spyro 2 or Year of the Dragon. Jury's out on this one. So, let's dive in ourselves and check out what really makes this game tick. Year of the Dragon opens on a cozy scene of Spyro and the other dragon sleeping away in the artisan's homeworld, surrounded by their eggs. Soon, however, Bianca the rabbit shows up with a crew of Rhinox, who begin carting the eggs away. Thankfully for the dragons, Bianca steps on Hunter's tail on her way out, waking him and the dragons in the process. The gang try to stop her, but ultimately, she escapes. We then cut to a faraway palace where Bianca reports to the Sorceress, an evil dinosaur crocodile thing bent on collecting all of the dragon's eggs. Unbeknownst to our 2 evildoers, a fairy manages to overhear the conversation and report what she's learned to the dragons in the artisan's homeworld. Turns out, the eggs were taken to the Forgotten Realms on the other side of the world. Hunter and Spyro are the only 2 small enough to fit through the burrows made by Bianca and the Rhinox, and with that, Spyro's quest to return the eggs begins. Right off the bat, we're already hit with a lot of similarities and callbacks to the previous game. Old characters like Hunter and Moneybags return. Gameplay is largely the same as well, with Spyro controlling exactly how he did at the end of Spyro 2. There's no need for you to spend gems on relearning all of the abilities you learned in the previous game either. Things like swimming and climbing are unlocked from the very beginning. A lot of games like to have the player go through the whole rigmarole of unlocking everything again from the start, mostly as a way to give the player a familiar sense of accomplishment and to pad out the progression of the game. If unlocking abilities is central to your gameplay loop, coming up with new and unique ideas can be pretty darn taxing. So it's easy to fall into the trap of playing your character as though they've gotten amnesia and can't remember any of what they learned in the previous entries. Sometimes this can be a good thing. If you're playing a game like Metroid, for example, then chances are unlocking abilities is central to the experience. Taking away Samus's powers is almost a necessary evil. Most of the time, it's also justified in the story, giving you a motivation to regain your abilities and progress through the game. But in platformers, especially one as simple as Spyro, losing and regaining abilities is far from a necessity. Spyro's moves are really basic and easy to pick up, even for someone who's new to games in general. As a result, they don't tend to have much value as a reward for gameplay. In this case, it's best to just introduce a problem and have the player figure out what ability they need to use in order to solve it, instead of having them backtrack after unlocking the ability like you would in a game like Metroid. When it comes to the actual progression of Year of the Dragon, things are centered more around completing levels and finding collectibles. Just as extra moves and abilities played a minor role in Spyro 2, they take a back seat in Year of the Dragon, with this game aiming to make the experience a little more structured and consistent, starting with the number of levels in the game. Year of the Dragon simplifies some things about both of the previous games, finding a middle ground in terms of number of homeworlds. Where the previous entries featured 6 and 3 respectively, Year of the Dragon features exactly 4. Sunrise Spring, Midday Gardens, Evening Lake, and Midnight Mountain, continuing the theming around time that was introduced in Spyro 2 with its season-themed homeworlds. However, taking a page out of the Spyro 1 book, Year of the Dragon's homeworlds contain the same number and kinds of levels, each featuring exactly 4 levels, 1 speedway, a level centered around a new character, 1 boss, and a bonus Sparks level should you decide to return to the homeworld later. Of course, returning features like speedways are fairly similar to the previous entries in the series. Instead of just being a time trial where you collect all of the items on the course and then come back later to find Hunter, they're now fleshed out with an extra racing challenge. It adds just a bit more to do in the level and leaves it feeling that much more complete. It also shows that the developers knew where some of the strengths already were in the game, so they could go back and tweak them just a little bit to make them shine. Other parts of the game stayed largely the same in structure, like the regular levels for what are probably obvious reasons. Levels are still structured as mostly one line from beginning to end with a couple of side objectives thrown in, usually a couple of mini-games or a sub-level featuring whatever new character you get to unlock in whichever homeworld you happen to be. You also have plenty of opportunities to collect eggs and gems along the way, eggs being the standing collectible for dragons, orbs, or talismans from the previous games. The mini-games in Year of the Dragon are somewhat of a mixed bag in comparison to their predecessors. As you progress through any given level, you'll find 1 or 2 of these purple swirly portal doors, keeping the mini-games distinctly separate from the rest of the level. Because of this, the bonus objectives in Year of the Dragon tend to be more interesting than a lot of what is in Spyro 2. Many of the bonus objectives in the previous game relied on temporary power-ups to complete tasks, but Year of the Dragon does away with the power-up gates in favor of actual structured games or mechanics. Sometimes the games in these special areas feel the same as anything you'd find in Spyro 2. Ice hockey, for example, is a minigame that shows up in both titles, but the majority of the minigames are unique to Year of the Dragon. And staying with the theme of refining and evolving what came before, some of the minigames return throughout the game, always changing or evolving in some way. Skateboarding is one of these games. Seeing as Year of the Dragon came out in 2000, branding your character as cool and rad was all the rage. And what better way to do that than by making them skateboard? Heck, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 had only come out 1 year prior, and Pro Skater 2 released just 1 month before Year of the Dragon. Skateboarding games were pretty much guaranteed to resonate with the PlayStation audience at the time. The first time it shows up in Year of the Dragon, Hunter has Spyro skate around a small skate park, chasing off lizards who have taken up residence there. This serves as a low-stakes tutorial for how skateboarding works, getting you used to the controls before getting you to do anything too complicated. The next time you see the skateboarding minigame, Hunter has you competing against him for who can do the most tricks and get the highest score. This is closer in line with what I would expect from any skateboarding game. It's also what Pro Skater was capitalizing off of at the time as well, so it only feels like a logical inclusion. I mean, the tricks you can do in this game aren't crazy impressive like they are in other skateboarding games, but if you're new to games or you just like cozy little platformers, this is some top-notch stuff. Where the skateboarding begins to lose appeal comes soon after that, when the game transitions from riding around on half-pipes and doing cool, sick ollies to racing. Skateboard racing in Year of the Dragon consists of doing tricks to build up boost power and then spending that boost power to build up speed. The more complicated the tricks you do, the more boost you get. Only problem is that it really doesn't feel natural to be racing like this. The tricks can be very hard to pull off while also trying to stay on the track. It's incredibly easy to overshoot and fly off. Plus, the Rhinox you race against can be a bit too fast, adding a level of difficulty that doesn't suit the rest of the game. A problem that's all the more prominent in the original version, where the Rhinox move even faster than they do in the Reignited trilogy. On the bright side, however, if you do manage to land a couple of good tricks and boost your way to first place, it's incredibly easy to keep your position. No need to boost or maintain your top speed, just coast your way to the finish line. But that also lends itself to the weird, out-of-place feeling that the skate racing has. I don't personally think that this version of the minigame was an afterthought. By the contrary, it really does feel like a logical progression after learning to skate and then learning to do tricks. Now you just have to do both of those things in order to school some nerds! However, I have heard the criticism that it does feel like an afterthought, and I totally get where people are coming from in that regard. The difficulty doesn't feel in line with the rest of the game, and the mechanics of doing tricks while racing and trying to stay on the track don't feel as intuitive as I've come to expect from Spyro. For the most part, this is a problem that most of the minigames in Year of the Dragon manage to avoid. But for any of the games that alter how Spyro controls or put you in a vehicle, there's a pretty heavy chance that movement is going to feel weird and out of place. I personally prefer the minigames that present a new challenge that needs to be solved using Spyro's existing skills. Trying to solve the puzzle of which seeds to plant where so you can climb to the top of a hill is a lot more fun and fits in better with the rest of the game than floating around on this boat that can't decide which direction to move when you press forward on the joystick. Providing new and interesting forms of traversal is a very attractive idea for any platformer, so it's no wonder that the concept was played around with so much in Year of the Dragon. Each homeworld was even given an entire level dedicated to that purpose. As you progress through the game, you'll happen upon money bags several times, once in each homeworld holding a prisoner of the sorceress for ransom. Pay that ransom with the gems you've collected along your journey, and you'll unlock an entire level and several minigames and other levels where you get to play as this new character. Each of these new characters controls completely different from any of the others and from Spyro, mostly existing as a way to throw some variety into the gameplay of Year of the Dragon. By now, I'm sure we're all familiar with how Spyro controls: jump around, charge into stuff, and occasionally glide across gaps. As for the other characters, Sheila the Kangaroo focuses more on vertical platforming, timing her jumps to build up height and scale tall ledges. Sergeant Bird focuses on traversing 3D space, flying around, shooting baddies with missiles, and dropping various items on unsuspecting Rhinox, or buttons, from above. Bentley the Yeti breaks from the platforming nature of the game entirely, focusing more on swinging around his big club to smash objects and baddies, while also providing what is quite possibly the most controversial minigame in Year of the Dragon. It's another one of those times where the subject seems to come up so frequently among the fanbase that I feel I need to give it an obligatory mention, but I honestly don't think Yeti boxing was so bad. Just punch where the other guy's not blocking. Anyway, Bentley's break from the regular platforming nature of the game still fits in fairly well with the rest of the experience, since smashing dudes with Spyro's horns and flame breath are still a major part of the game. However, the last character, Agent 9, breaks from the gameplay loop in some less logical ways. Borrowing a lot from the progression of the skateboarding minigames, Agent 9's levels all operate slightly differently while stemming from one original concept. Each of his levels plays like a classic shooter genre, moving from a third-person shooter to first-person, then a top-down perspective, and finally, an on-rail shooter, much like you'd find in an arcade or Rayman Raving Rabbids, effectively covering nearly all of the different types of shooting games that were gaining traction in the games industry at the time. The problem with this is that the shooter genre doesn't tend to mesh that well with a platformer like Spyro, and while all of these formats are technically shooters, they also don't mesh well with each other. The progression of the skateboarding minigame felt natural, as each new progression felt like a logical extension of whatever came before it. With Agent 9, that really isn't the case. Moving from a third-person perspective to a top-down perspective may feel at least tangentially related, but going from third-person to first-person, or even from a first-person perspective where you get to run around and control your own movement, to an on-rail shooter where you don't get to control your own movement, feels inconsistent and out of place. Not to mention how poorly they control. Shooters require a great deal of accuracy, which is just missing in this game, likely in order to maintain the same feeling of moving the camera as you do when controlling Spyro. That almost made sense in the original version, partially because of how new many game genres were at the time. But why they chose not to iron out those quirks in the Reignited trilogy will always be beyond me. And finally, we have Sparks, who isn't unlocked the same way as the other characters, but is instead presented as a bonus level if you return to any homeworlds you've previously completed. His levels play like a top-down twin-stick bullet hell shooter, which is just a whole bunch of word salad that means you scoot around while shooting and dodging a bunch of projectiles. Sparks skirts dangerously close to falling victim to the same problems as Agent 9, but manages to avoid it somehow, whether through the fact that these levels feel more arcadey than Agent 9's levels, or perhaps through the reality that they exist as bonus levels. Sparks levels come across more as fun side objectives than they do out-of-place genre mechanics. And if you do decide to return to previous homeworlds to play these levels, Sparks will gain extra abilities outside of them, such as taking one extra hit for Spyro, or collecting gems that are further away. Not anything massively game-changing, but still nice quality of life additions. As for the story in Year of the Dragon, it's structured much the same as in Spyro 2, with some cutscenes playing between worlds or levels as you progress through the game, albeit with a distinct lack of those cute intro-outro sequences for each individual level that was present in the last game. This time around, we just get the distinct cutscenes that contribute to the main plot, which of course is very simple, just as it was in Spyro 2. As you progress through the game, you'll learn more about the sorceress and her intentions, revealing that she needs the dragon eggs in order to return magic to the world, a clearly benevolent cause if it weren't for the fact that she keeps shouting about how Spyro needs to die in order for that to happen, and if not for her later reveal that she only needs the dragon wings, which she plans to acquire through genocide. All the while, Bianca keeps bumping into Spyro and Hunter, slowly learning that these guys aren't so bad after all, and also learning a few things about Hunter, apparently. So, when the sorceress reveals to Bianca that she plans to murder every dragon in order to take their wings and cast a spell that will make her live forever, Bianca's out. She joins sides with Spyro and Hunter, and Spyro faces off against the sorceress. So I guess now is as good a time as any to talk about the boss fights, and honestly, I don't really have much to say about them. If you haven't seen my videos on the previous two games, you should totally check them out. There's a link in the top right corner. I talk about the bosses a good deal in those. But, full takeaway, the bosses in this franchise are super lackluster. They don't really have a lot going for them in terms of engaging gameplay. The bosses that you fight up until this point in the story are basic platformer boss fights, just as they were in the previous game, with Spyro getting help from his newly acquired allies as they drop power-ups into the arena which you'll use to actually damage the bad guy. And, par for the course, the final boss adds nothing to this pattern, in some ways even taking away from what makes the previous bosses engaging. Agent 9 drops vehicles onto the arena, you hop on, blast the sorceress, and she dies a fiery death, but psych, not really. The end. It's a shame, because after the progress that was made in terms of boss design between Spyro 1 and 2, I saw a lot of potential for something great in Year of the Dragon. But I guess I just missed the mark on this one. The rest of the story involves an interview with Bentley as a nod to the first game, followed by a short epilogue where Spyro goes to the other characters looking for Hunter, only to find out that he's too busy smooching Bianca at the fireworks factory. After that, there's only one thing left to do. Find the rest of the eggs and beat the super bonus round. Now, usually a super bonus round in any other game would consist of the best parts of the experience up until this point, but Year of the Dragon likes to break the mold sometimes. For this game, the super bonus round is broken up into 4 portions. A submarine level, much like one of the clunky vehicle levels from earlier, sheep shooting, like the Hunter sections of the speedways, skateboard racing, which we all love, right? And a rematch with the sorceress. The submarine and sheep shooting levels are fine. Nice additions to a post-game bonus round like this one. But I think I've already done enough ranting about the skateboard racing levels for a lifetime, and you know my feelings about that. The only difference between this one and the previous ones are that this one is way harder in a sort of obtuse and annoying way, rather than anything compelling. And the sorceress rematch is somehow less interesting or challenging than the first go-around. Go figure. All in all, Year of the Dragon is pretty great. I always get a little self-conscious when writing scripts like this because there is a lot of room for improvement, and sometimes giving my feedback and criticisms can feel a little too negative or unconstructive. But it is what it is. Every game's got room to grow. And it can't be helped after following up from Spyro 2, which basically defined the Spyro formula and, by extension, Year of the Dragon. This game really does its best to innovate and expand on the second game in many ways, but as a result, ends up feeling like an alternate universe version of the same experience. Most of the things Spyro 2 did well, Year of the Dragon also did well. Most of the things Spyro 2 did poorly, Year of the Dragon also does poorly. And they try a few new new and interesting ideas which end up working out as well as the parts of Spyro 2 that aren't included in Year of the Dragon. This game was always my favorite from the trilogy growing up, and making this series on YouTube has been eye-opening in a lot of ways, especially knowing exactly why Year of the Dragon ended up being my favorite. I played it first, that's it, that's the whole reason. And I honestly believe that's why most people prefer Year of the Dragon or Spyro 2. Whichever one they played first is also probably their favorite. If you presented me with both of these games not knowing which one came before the other, I'd probably struggle to figure it out. One doesn't feel more developed than the other, and one isn't strictly better than the other. It doesn't feel like a strict progression from one to the next, but more of a sidestep, an alternate universe version of the same experience. But of course, that concludes the big three Spyro games. They did follow up on the franchise with a few other entries like Enter the Dragonfly before departing entirely to make this edgy teenage version of the little scaly dude, and then bring the toys of life genre into the forefront of the games industry for a few years. But aside from that, this is it. There is a fan project working to bring Enter the Dragonfly into the Reignited trilogy as a mod though, so maybe when that releases I'll have to make a video about that one as well. If that sounds like something you'd like to see, please let me know in the comments. And if you managed to watch this far in the video, why not leave a little comment saying hello? For now, I've been Cosmo. Thanks for watching.